All right, welcome everybody. It's a little after 1 o'clock. We will go ahead and get started. We'll have a few stragglers coming in here as we get going, a couple of housekeeping notes, and then we'll get into what everyone's here for. There is a Q&A section that should be within your Teams browser. If you can go ahead and use that as you have questions, feel free to ask them, and then we will answer them live. If for whatever reason we run over time, we will make sure that we get you answers off of this live session, but we will make sure no matter what, you do get an answer to your question. So with that, thank you again for joining. My name is Adam Hill. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Scarborough Group. And today I have Mr. Matt Wilcox with me. Matt is the Vice President and Managing Director for Scarborough Transportation. Scarborough Transportation is one of the 5 operating companies that surmise the Scarborough Group. And today we're 100% focused around truck brokerage and some of the myths that we have all heard over time and just in general. And along with that, it's going to give us a good opportunity for you all to hear from Matt, for me to ask some questions of Matt, for hopefully for you all to get some of your questions answered, and really just get into what this is about. If you've been on any of these with us before, the presentation should only take 20 or so minutes, maybe not even that long. And then most of this is designed around Q&A. And that's what we want. That makes it, frankly, more fun for Matt and I. So with that, I will get this turned over to Matt to get started. I will tell you that Matt sat on the other side of the desk from me for many years. I can tell you that I was unsuccessful in getting any of Matt's business when he worked on the other side of the desk into Scarborough, but somehow I was able to convince him to come work for us. So I'm going to count that as a bigger win anyway. So with that, Matt, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, as Adam mentioned, I sat on the other side of the desk for 25 plus years. So a lot of these myths I used to believe myself. I used to say to brokers or 3PLs that would call on me, including Adam in the group. So like I said, it's a little bit of fun back and forth that we used to have, especially as a transportation manager. So, and like I said, I handled global transportation for a company for 17 years prior to coming to Scarborough. So, well, like I said, we'll get into some of the myths. Some of the more common ones that I've heard or used myself that we'll discuss are truck brokers cost more. Truck brokers bring nothing to the table. I used to think that wholeheartedly. Truck brokers lack technology. And then we'll have some bonus myths, why it matters as far as giving a couple examples, some customers that we've been dealing with here this year and end of last year. So we'll go ahead and move on into the myth 1. Okay, so as we talk about truck brokers costing more, one of the things as a shipper I would always get myself caught up into, and I hear a lot of, even as I'm going out and making calls, is a lot of the shippers are relying on or talking about how they're only looking at the cost per mile when comparing to the internal transportation departments. And as a shipper, I would catch myself in that same trap. Thinking about, well, if I'm at $2 a mile and my broker's at $2.10 a mile, obviously I don't need a broker. The only thing I would not consider every once in a while is total cost. So if you think about delays, one of the factors that would come into play when you look at costing more is if you have inventory sitting around on the side of the road or waiting for a truck to come in that you've booked through one of your carriers. That can cost you money in the long run as you've shut down lines. And speaking from experience, that has happened. It's never a fun conversation to have when the COO or the CFO or even the CEO calls you up and asks about why your line is shut down. Well, I saved 10 cents a mile, but it cost me thousands of dollars in productivity. So that's one of the areas that we focus a lot on when we're talking with our customers is total cost. Look at it beyond just the cost per mile. And as a other factor, when we start thinking about things, we start looking at the transportation management system, or TMS. There's a lot of different companies that are out there, so our shippers that currently still do not have a TMS. My first 5 years with my previous company, we used spreadsheets and instead of a TMS, which makes it tough to either A, have a conversation when you go through and do a financial review, or B, when you start looking at the lanes that you may be leaking as far as cost. And by the time you react, it's after the fact. So what we do typically with some of our customers that would like to have the use of a TMS, we will load their rates into TMS and give them access as well. So that way, when they're going to look at tendering load, they can use our TMS access to book a carrier, find a carrier, and get it out there. So, and like I said, you don't have to invest that time anymore or additional time when you're using the spreadsheets, because time is a killer too. It's not only cost of inventory that's sitting on the side of the road, but it's also your internal assets that are taking time as well, as they're busy running and booking equipment off a spreadsheet. So, and then when you look at brokers and carriers under contract, individual businesses, you may not have as many carriers under contract as a broker. We deal with a lot of large national, regional, and of course, mom and pop carriers. Sometimes the CEO is running that truck. So, so you have to look at your mix of carriers as well. And I would get caught up in the trap as well. I would thought I'd had plenty of carriers under contract where I may have 10 LTL carriers and 15 truckload carriers. What I'd find in a lot of cases is get into a capacity constraint. Then I'd be in trouble as far as getting my loads out on time, and then also costs. So when you look at a truck broker, brokers, we typically will have hundreds of carriers under contract and good relationships with our carriers that have been vetted and properly set up in the system to use. So, like I said, truck brokers as a cost.
Let's talk about the last one a little bit. There's oftentimes you hear people, and I think you were in this same boat as well at some point. Everyone said, well, if I consolidate all of my spend with one carrier, right, I'm going to get a better deal, a better rate. And personally, to me, while there is some validity in the argument, I kind of look at it no different than if you only pick that you're going to fly American Airlines or you're only going to fly Delta. While in the lanes that maybe that one or two carriers is core, and you're right, they may have phenomenal rates, but the minute that you want to fly Delta to Chicago, nobody wants to stop in Minneapolis first, right? I'd rather just get there quickly. So I think there's another myth that floats around a little bit just inside of here around the idea that, if we consolidate all of our spend, we get better rates. And while there is some legitimacy to that piece of the puzzle, I think that coming inside of a truck brokerage operation, I'm not just saying ours, and I guess I should have started with that too, as much as Matt and I would love for everyone on the call to become a customer by 4:30 this afternoon. That's not what this is about. This is about sharing our knowledge and hopefully answering some questions for you all. But maybe talk a little bit more about your experience when you were on the shipper side, right? When you sat across the table from me, how you handled that. And then as you kind of have expanded and explored that world on the brokerage side, where you've seen some differences.
Yeah, sure. And as a shipper, I'd kind of get into that same mode, right? So I would put a lot of my volume into select few carriers that handle my shipments, and where I thought I was leading the market in some of the rates as far as having the lower rates was not necessarily true, because not every carrier can handle every lane, as far as being the lowest cost carrier. So I would get myself caught in that trap every once in a while, handing off my freight to carrier A, which may have covered from Kansas City to Wyoming with great rates. But Kansas City to Houston, I would find myself one of my more expensive rates lanes with that carrier. But we got into the mode of using that carrier all the time, had a great relationship, and we were not watching the total cost occasionally. And so as a broker, as I look through and talk to our customers, we're looking at different carriers that are throughout the United States, and we will pair up carriers that have great rates into a certain region. And then we'll have a different carrier that may have rates into a separate region that are more competitive. So we will have access to use multiple carriers to keep those costs in line for those customers. And so, and as a shipper, as sitting down and meeting with those carriers to do negotiations, I didn't have all year long to sit down and meet with 50, 60, 70 carriers. And so that's why I tried to keep my stable of carriers to a small number of carriers to handle them a little easier. So as a broker, again, we do have access to several hundred, if not thousands of carriers that we use to be able to cover lanes at a competitive price.
Well, and I think it even comes back to this idea that I hate to say this, but what we all do moving a piece of freight from point A to point B at some level is a commodity. And I think that while you may, quote an individual shipment, and not only me, I mean, we have a few folks that I noticed on this call that are, I would consider a competitor at some level as well. And you might call them today on a rate from Kansas City to Chicago and they have the best rate, and then me tomorrow. But I think that gets into this idea that you're talking about total cost. And, brokers get a bad rap in a lot of areas. And to be totally honest with the group on here, we were, as a company, we made a decision that we weren't even going to call ourselves a truck broker from 2014 until 2023 because we didn't love the word. And last year we said, forget it. We're going to do this and we're going to do it right. And there's plenty of people out there that do it really well. And so yes, we are a broker, and yes, that's part of it. We're also an asset carrier and some other things. But at the end of the day, I think that the idea around total cost of ownership is something that we don't always see when we're talking about this to our customer. And I don't think that everyone thinks they have the best widget, ourselves included. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of room for a lot of success for a lot of people within this market. And it's not always just because you're spending more money to get something better. And I think that's a big piece of this.
I agree with you. And in a lot of cases, as a shipper, even when we had that small stable of carriers, we get in the habit of handing off that freight to that carrier, and that freight would sit for a couple of days just until they had a truck that came back into that market. So using a broker who has got the reach has definitely helped as far as customers when inventory is king, especially right now with a lot of hand to mouth, just in time freight, making sure that freight is on the road and it's moving. So like I said, total cost of ownership is very important. When you look at that freight, you can't just look at it as a cost per mile and move on. So, well, we can go on to myth number 2. The truck brokers bring nothing to the table. This was my biggest thing I used to say as a shipper. I think I told Adam and several others the same thing, that you really can't do anything for me. So there's no reason for me to change from what I'm doing today. So, well, in fact, that's not necessarily true. If you think about the relationship that you have with a broker, we actually do bring a lot of things to the table. When you think of TMS, you think of customer service, you think of tracking, you think of reports that we can bring out to the table as far as using our TMS, either with a canned report or a custom built report. Good brokers make good partners, and we can bring a lot visibility to your business. And especially for some customers that are using spreadsheets, a lot of it, when you use a TMS, you increase your visibility. And we also can help with the looking at lanes and finding solutions too. And that's a big piece of it. Because if you look at just finding a carrier to haul your shipments, right, you're not looking at your trends, and that's where we can step in and look at trends and look at different service lanes as far as costs. So and making sure everything's classified accurately too. So like on the brokerage side, or even on our LTL side, what we find occasionally is a shipper may have the wrong freight class. And so when we've helped work with them as far as making sure things are classified properly, they're able to make sure their accruals are correct and everything else. So you start thinking about just not that transactional business, but what else can we do for you as a broker? So, when we get into, even our teams will get into to get to know the business and the people in the on the customer side. We're basically, like I said, another set of eyes and ears and boots on the ground when it comes to your business. So good brokers will sit there and make a good partner with the shipper as well. So, but we do bring more than just, here's a rate, we're going to fill your truck. So
I definitely think you nailed it with the partnership idea, and that's obviously something we stress here. And there's plenty of folks that do the same. And that idea that says you're bringing a partner, we always like to explain this. You, as the customer, are experts in the widget you manufacture, the item you sell. That's what you do. We move. That's what we do. And so, you don't oftentimes when you ask people, do you do your own taxes, or do you like, well, no, I use this, or well, did you file your own legal pay? No, I used an attorney. Well, you use those people because you assume that they are experts in what they do. And I think that brokers are often overlooked as an expert. They're often looked at as maybe a cheap way to accomplish something,
Yes.
but there is so much more that a truck broker brings to the table. And I should caveat that a good truck broker brings to the table, because I do think the industry as a whole does have a bit of a bad rap. Some large competitors maybe have a bad rap. Just the idea of the digital forwarder, which I'll ask Matt a few questions on as we get to the end here, but we are so much more than just finding something, and it's about relationship and bringing that to the table, both to you as the shipper and frankly to the carrier, because we have the ability, we provide that partnership both ways. And I think that's something that's often overlooked when we sit down and we start having these conversations with customers. As much as we want to bring a partnership to you, our vendors, the trucking companies, are obviously a very key part of this conversation as well.
Correct. And if you look back at the pandemic, capacity was a big issue too, right? So brokers have the ability to bring more capacity to the table. I know during the pandemic, as a shipper, we struggled to get equipment in as far as carriers, and even costly, as far as not just timely, but also the cost. So having a bigger book of carriers allows us that option, that reality of getting capacity in to help our customers cover their needs. So like I said, a lot of it just in time right now. As far as inventories, can't afford to have your freight sitting on the side of a road or sitting in your warehouse waiting to get out the door. So we do bring a lot to the table when you start thinking about just the relationships that we maintain with our carriers, the service levels that we get with those carriers. And it's just not a transactional business. Again, I used to think of brokers as just a transactional business and not necessarily an extension or a partnership. So towards the end, as I kind of get through my beliefs or my opinions, some of them actually were pretty good partnership. So we'll move on to the third myth that we're going to talk about as far as lacking technology. And this one, I think, is definitely a misunderstanding by some of the shippers, because when you look at technology and you look at a broker, a lot of the brokers have a lot of great IT infrastructure and technology. Obviously, they're able to run those costs over many transactions or several different customers. So that allows them to bring in technology. A good TMS is worth its weight in gold as far as that's concerned. When you're looking at analyzing your freight and your lanes and your spend, a broker will have good technology when it comes to a TMS. I know we have searched several different times as far as going out and finding the proper TMS and bringing it to our customers. So having given them the portal access to go in there and see some of their own rates and see what we're doing there as far as what coverage is always key. You look at also some of the on-time tracking mechanisms as far as where's my equipment, what's going on. You've got several different platforms that are out there that you can bolt onto some of the TMSs to track your deliveries and everything else. And of course, the communication is king. We have a great, very robust internal communication platform. We use the system. So as we have a dedicated customer service rep that's on an account, if they are out sick, someone can step right in, pull up that account, see the last communications and see where we are, see what they're working on, and can move forward without any interruptions. So, and then from a communication standpoint, we are quick to advise when a carrier's coming in, when it's picked up, estimated time for delivery, and send back documents upon delivery of the freight, and make sure we notify the customer as well. So very key. Not a lot of times, like coming again from personal experience, where we'd ship something and we wouldn't know if it's delivered or not until we picked up the phone and called somebody, which gets a little frustrating, especially for the sales staff that were getting beat up by the customer too, as far as, is it in transit? When am I going to have it? So having the technology can solve a lot of issues or avoid a lot of issues for customers. So, and like I said, good brokers will have good technology to help out with that.
Well, I think this is such an interesting myth to me because you hear it often and it's not anything. And then you see these quote unquote digital brokers floating around, right?
Yeah.
And the industry is flocking to them like they are and the next best thing since sliced bread. And while they maybe bring a fresh approach to their own technology stack, I think that brokers that have been around, brokers that understand, I think that investment in technology is constant on our end. At least I know it is here. I see it the bills, and so at the end of the day, there is a lot of technology that goes into this, and we we joke often, and you know, as much as things like brokerage is digital, just in general, right? And what's the idea of digital? You can book a shipment online with someone like us, or pick half the competition out there, no different than you can with some of the more, like I said, digital forward type competitors. And where to me it gets really interesting is if you look at the industry and you look at a lot of these people who have come in and spent a lot of money on that tech stack, but haven't truly understood what the partnership behind that means. Is we saw Convoy just recently, right? Completely go out. That last year was valued at, if memory serves, 3.2, 3.8 billion
Yep.
or something like that. They go bankrupt 6 months later. I don't know about anybody here, but I know here you don't get that kind of valuation and it goes to zero overnight if you
No.
if you are doing things incorrectly. And I think what you're seeing is in this digital forward idea, everyone loves the idea. Technology's sexy, right? It's fun to talk about. It's fun for you as a customer to go up the hill and show someone like me and say, look, we're partnering with this new provider. We're going to provide this great look and feel of the technology, which is a huge piece of this puzzle. But behind the technology has to be the people running it well. And I think that's really the core of this. And I think that's where this myth comes from. Folks that do a good job, they pick up the phone, right? We talk on the phone a lot. We talk to our carriers often. We talk
Yes.
to our customers often. And so they kind of get this, well, I don't get all this technology stuff, but I know them. And I think the mix between those two gets blurred often. And I think for a lot of our customer base, a lot of our competition, there's a lot more technology floating around out there with tried and true brokers rather than the constant startup and the constant push and marketing efforts of some of these more digitally forward type folks. You know, some of those folks, while they may not be great freight brokers, they are phenomenal marketers. And so I think that that's what we've seen over the course of time. And I think the other piece that Matt you hit on is TMS.
Yeah.
And you know, you as a shipper implemented your own TMS internally, and I'd be curious to maybe hear a little bit about how you went through that process. And then on the flip side, you know, talk about how our TMS or just in general ATMS can work from a broker's perspective.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, the TMS, as far as implementation, like I said, we went through and did a search as far as my previous company, and that takes time, right? And it takes bandwidth, and so we chose not to completely do it ourselves because we didn't have the bandwidth. So we had to go through a third party, and like I said, it was a journey. It took time. We implemented in 6 different countries on the same platform. And so did it have issues? Sure, it did. And so having a partner that helped us out was beneficial for us. But again, not having that TMS, going into a meeting with the executives to talk about why your freight was running 7% instead of 4.5%. And everything was after the fact, and how are you going to fix it? And by the time you'd find where you're leaking and everything else and kind of put things together, you're already in another month. And so, like I said, having that technology at your fingertips means a lot. And it takes some time to go through the process and get things set up. But having it as a shipper makes a world of a difference. Going through it as a broker, same process. I mean, when I came on board last July, we were already deep into the process of having the TMS implemented. So I missed out on some of the fun, but we are bringing it up in some of our companies in Mexico, and we'll have that up and running here end of this next month. So it's a challenge, but it's worth its reward at the end, having that visibility, having the reports and everything else. So some of the other things to think about when you think about technology too is just having that visibility as far as the bill of ladings coming through the system, being able to generate that, having it tied to your internal ERP system, so that way you're depleting inventory when you ship. Just some of the technology that is a benefit when you use a good TMS. And then, like I said, having the documents as far as storage too is a key thing from an electronic standpoint. So,
Well, I think there's a piece in the middle of this too, right? There's this idea that says, the company you worked for previously was a very large multinational
yes,
organization that had the bandwidth, the budget, the time to implement something like this. When you came here, we were on, I think it was our third TMS since Scarborough
yes,
Transportation has existed, as we continue to try to find the right one. But I think there's this middle ground, because we do hear customers say, we don't have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. And I think where you see a lot of folks, I know we offer this, and the ability to utilize our TMS, whether you're using us as a broker or not, but utilizing our technology stack for you. Obviously, the implementation's already done, right? I already spent the money to do that. And you turn around and you get a lot of what you're talking about from going uphill and saying, hey, we're up, we're down, whatever our trends look like, but you're utilizing somebody else's tech stack, and that can often be implemented, exponentially faster and much, 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 much less cheaper than going out and procuring all of this on your own.
correct. We just recently implemented one of our customers who did not have a TMS, was using spreadsheets. We set them up with our TMS. The implementation was quick and painless as far as for them. They're able now to go in there and use our carrier base, and even we've loaded even some of their rates in there too. So gives them the ability to select the cheapest option for them, but also have the capacity to cover their needs when they need them. So having that at their fingertips is very key to their success of their business. So, and not having to go out there and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for the rights to the software, and also the IT side when it comes to the programming and everything else. Like I said, like I said, if you're just looking at it from a single business, it's a big investment. And brokers are able to spread that out over the cost based on all of their transactions, which helps out. So, but it makes a big difference having that technology. And one thing we haven't even really talked about when you start talking about digital, and we're not really talking much about it in this webinar, but is fraud. If you start thinking about all the fraud that's going out there right now, and I think it was the president of TIA last year talked about how the fraud within the industry, as far as fake brokers, fake truckers, and everything else, is going to cost up to $800 million to the consumers, to the shippers, to the brokers, all the double brokering that was going on. So some of that digital, as far as brokerage side, can be a little challenging if you're not hands-on and vetting your carriers and everything else too. So having that relationship with a broker, having them an extension of your business, makes a big difference when you start looking at the cost of your customer, to your bottom line. And especially with today, like I said, with the fraud that's going on out there right now, that'll be another subject for a different webinar, but it's a big impact. We've been able to, we had a customer that we saved them because they didn't realize that they had someone had requested a shipment, and we end up finding that it was a fraudulent shipment before they were able to deliver, and the goods were taken. So having that relationship again is key. So, but having the tools to be able to do it using a broker makes that cost a little more bearable than just having to, especially for the smaller shippers, having to eat that cost up front. And just the maintenance side alone is enough to cost a fortune. So for the small companies. So anyway, we can move on to some of the bonus myths. And so some of the bonus myths that we are going to talk about a little bit as we're starting to bump up on time, but truck brokers have limited capacity. We kind of talked a little bit about this when you start thinking about the hundreds of carriers that you have under contract. So most of the brokers, good brokers, they do have plenty of capacity to offer and in several different lanes. So that's one that can be debunked pretty quickly when you start thinking about that versus just internal. Another one is our bad truck brokers are bad communicators, do a poor job of follow-up. And like I said, I won't speak for the entire industry. There are some that are out there from just a transactional standpoint that may not do a very good job of following up and keeping the customer informed on where their freight is and when it's going to get delivered. But in the good ones, we set up a single contact and have a team communication email, so that way we stay on top. We communicate when truck's coming in. We're making sure that we call the location to make sure the time is set up. Give a good communication as far as indication of when the freight's going to be delivered. Any delays, we're not hiding behind anything. You need to bring up the bad news quickly to the customer. So I always used to say, bad news, tell me quickly. Good news, tell me, but not as quickly as bad news. So that way you can work through any problems that you may have. And then one size fits all for brokers is not necessarily true. When we talk about some of the examples that we're going to have here shortly, we've created and we look at each individual customer and come up with a solution that's best for their business. It's not just, if you want a transactional business, like I said, we may not be your person as far as your broker, but we can definitely help you out on that. But we're here to help you out with a solution that makes sense for your business. So definitely one size doesn't fit all.
I think you hit on something in the middle about the bad communication. We actually have a question that just came in kind of around that. And so the question goes lots of ways. I'll try to keep my opinion somewhat to myself, but the question in a nutshell is, why is it hard for the pickup driver to get clear instructions of shipper's requirements? You ask for a 53-foot dry van, you get a reefer. Trailers come in dirty if you require food grade. The list goes on and on and on. And you already hit on one of these as we're talking about truck brokers are bad communicators. And part of it is frankly that. Let's be completely honest. But I think the other part is what you've hit on consistently throughout this entire thing is we want partners, we want partner carriers. And I think that is also part of this. And I hate to turn the table a little bit, but I will. And it's, constantly, I mean, how many times do we get asked, can you, so-and-so can do it for $1 cheaper. So-and-so can do it for, a penny a mile cheaper. And what I turn around and I start to ask our customers often, and they say, are you the lowest cost widget, whatever you're providing? Right. And they look at me astounded that I would ever think that of them. Yeah. But they turn around and ask that of their broker to no matter what be the lowest cost provider. And I think that there is something, at some level you get what you pay for, especially in this space. And I think that is why there's such a bad wrap up and kind of just a myriad of different types of brokers that exist out there. And this is obviously a big one.
It is. And communication, like you said, when you talked about, I want to a reefer and I get a dry van, or I want a flatbed and I've got a van, and so a lot of it boils down to A, knowing your customer, and B, asking the correct questions too. So you just can't assume anything, especially if it's it's a new customer or existing customer. As a broker, you still have to understand their business. Still have to understand what they're shipping and what their needs are, and making sure that you communicate that with your carrier. And especially if it's a pickup time, and they're going into a distribution center of a third party, knowing and having that open communication between yourself, the carrier, and also that third party, making sure that if there's any requirements, my previous job, we delivered to a lot of job sites. So a lot of the carriers had to have steel-toed shoes, had to have high vis, had to have safety glasses, had to have hard hats. And if we were not able to, and if we did not have that conversation with their carrier or the broker ahead of time, any driver would show up, we'd get turned around. And then we're scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, now we got to send this carrier off to another location, get it offloaded, get another carrier underneath it. So it boils down to true communication. And like I said, if you are a bad communicator, this business may not be for everybody. So, because if you're not asking the right questions, and you're not having that communication with that carrier and that customer, you can create a mess pretty quick. So, and that's a myth, or in some cases, it's a fact for some that are in our industry that are just send something in, they can load it up on that truck surely, and then try to convince them to use that piece of equipment when it shows up. So those are the types of customers you're not going to keep long term if you're going to continue to do that. So, and as we look at customer retention, and I want to brag a little bit about it, but we still have the first customer since 1984 when we started this business. And they're still a great customer for us. So having that relationship is very key to our business, and it's very key to the development of our business. So listening to the customer means a lot. So as a former shipper, I would stick with the ones that would build that partnership and that would also care about my business and care about my job that I was trying to get through. So, like I said,
the problem is you just wouldn't ever listen to me to try to get you to come over. So
yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. So, but it's also, like I said, it's a change is always difficult, right? So I was one of those old-fashioned people that change was always tough. So
it is. Well, we've talked a lot about some of the myths, and I think you're getting ready to walk us through a little bit some of the solutions that we've provided just at a high level, and I'm kind of excited because this is where truly the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, and so as we look at some of the stories, as far as some of the solutions, we've got, like I said, a simple solution, transactional business. Find a flatbed, fill a flatbed, handle the shipment for the customer. Those are things we do every day, but we still have that relationship. So just kind of this traditional freight brokerage. Now we start looking and start thinking about some more complicated solutions as we sit down with customers and talk about their needs beyond just the transactional business. We had a prospect that we've talked to that's moving cargo from overseas and needed to get it into the Midwest, and so we're struggling with freight. And so obviously, as a freight broker, we have other departments. So we reached out through our international import-export department and had them come up with rates and come up with a solution to get the product to the States. As we worked then our solution to reduce their cost, instead of shipping on trucks to get it here to the Midwest, we worked out a deal to move it via rail to get it to the Midwest. And then we also worked with transloaders to move that freight into different types of equipment to then go that final mile. So a little more complicated than just transactional. And then if we think about, as I call it, the whole enchilada, we had a customer that approached us that we were doing some business with from our brokerage side, and we traveled up their place and had a meeting, and they were looking at reducing their cost, and they wanted to reduce their total cost of ownership by 10%. So as we sat down and got to know more of their business by asking several different questions, we advised them to get pricing from their supplier overseas as far as landed cost, as far as per ton to the United States, and what was going to be on an Ex Works basis. And so we provided them with a freight rate for import. And then we brought in that freight on our dray, because we do dray as well, brought it into our warehouse. And so we're warehousing that product for them. And we're also doing a lot of the pick and pack for them as well. And then shipping some of the product over to their facility where they're doing some consolidation or some mixing. And then we're taking it from that point on, because we brought it in on our trucks that we owned. And then we're shipping it outbound using our carriers under brokerage. So as we looked at that total solution for that customer, it's more than just the brokerage arm. We looked for the total cost of ownership to reduce that impact to the customer, and we're successful. So we went from handling just a small portion of the business to handling the whole enchilada, as I like to call it. So it's not just a one size fits all. We can come up, we can get creative, we can find ways to help, whether it's from our warehousing side or whether it's our logistics side, or our truck ownership or our brokerage or our imports. Listening to that customer and helping them come up and solve their issues is key. And as a former shipper, it goes a long way. It went a long way with me having someone listen to me and then also provide some feedback, because sometimes you get stuck in your lane and you think of, this is the only solution that I have, and having a little more creativity to help solve those problems goes a long ways. So those are a few of the different examples that we've helped at, that more than just a broker. So
Absolutely. Well, I think we kind of wrapped up the formal presentation part. If anybody knows me, this is about as formal as it gets. And we have some questions here that I've kind of just thought of as we've been going. If anyone else has more, please fire away and we'll make sure to get them answered. But one of the questions that we don't get often enough is nobody asks us as Scarborough or asks their provider. Everyone just assumes that, okay, if I booked a shipment and I paid you, you're paying your carriers on time. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so for me, one of the things that I would challenge a lot of you all to ask of your current partner in this space is, how are you? How well do you pay your carriers? Do you have long-term carriers, or are you constantly getting the next cheapest carrier that comes in the door because maybe it made them an extra $10 on the load? What does that look like? Because while in a very short time view, that may be a successful operation, that's when we get into things like fraud that we've all seen, right? And that's when we get into some of these other situations where your freight magically doesn't get picked up, and you obviously get fired up at your broker because you said, hey, so and so didn't pick up. And of course the broker likes to point the finger at the carrier, but at the end of the day, you didn't hire the carrier, you hired me, and it's my job to make sure that they showed up. And part of that holistically is to make sure that I pay my carriers, and that's a really important deal. And I think a lot of people overlook that fact as they're going out looking to source either a new broker, maybe getting into using a broker for the first time. To me, that is something that is often overlooked. What would be something that you would say? So for me, it's about, are my carriers getting paid? So when you were looking for a broker, what was maybe the one question that, obviously now that you flip sides, right now you're sitting on this side of the table, they're like, wow, I never asked about something, and now that I'm in the middle of it, maybe I should have.
Yeah, of course, as a shipper, I would love to pay Adam in 60 days, and then he could pay my carrier. But as a broker, I mean, it's very key. I mean, as you're working with carriers, cash is king. It's all about cash flow, right? And so, from a standpoint of building that relationship or that partnership with the carrier, we're making sure that we're paying our carriers in less than 30. Our terms are 30 days. We're paying in less than our terms, which is great for the carrier. It's one of the questions I would ask, because if you are constantly stringing out the carrier, your service or their ability or their want to pick up your freight has an impact on your business. Because if you're paying me in 60 days and our contract's 30, I may not have a truck available for every time you need it, especially in the lanes that where I'm the lowest cost carrier. Or a matter of fact, end of month, end of quarter, when you really need to get your freight out to get your sales dollars out the door, I may not have a driver for you. And so making sure that you're paying your carriers on time is very key. Like I said, in today's day and age, cash is king. So, and that's one of the things that our carriers constantly ask about when we're setting them up to get them in our system is what are our pay terms. Of course, everybody wants it paid in less than 30, but industry standards comes around 30 days. So, but it's very key in making sure that your freight is not sitting on the side of a road somewhere held captive until you get paid. So
No,
yeah, it's
absolutely. I think that's such an important piece that everyone just makes the assumption, right? That, oh, my broker's in business, so they must be doing something right. And then talk a little bit about, and I mean, you can talk maybe specifically about what we do here, but just in general, there you constantly hear about trucking companies going out of business or a trucking company getting in an accident, and you have this big nuclear verdict because God forbid, they hurt somebody or something along those lines. But when we source carriers here, especially when we start talking about, obviously on the LTL front, there's a lot of very, very well known, right? Big nationally recognized large regional type carriers. But when we get into that truckload market, that the idea of that market changes exponentially, and you have hundreds of thousands of individuals who, like you said, it's the CEO driving the truck because it's the only employee of the company. It is the one job I've never done here, and the guys try to get me in the truck all the time, and I say the insurance company does not want anything
yeah.
to do with me driving a truck. But when you talk about, the safer score, making sure that the carriers have insurance, and maybe talk a little bit about that, and making sure that as a shipper, what is your broker doing to make sure that they take care of those things?
Well, especially today's world, making sure that you're vetting your carrier is very important from a safety standpoint. It doesn't take much for a carrier if they have an accident that as a shipper, you can be wrapped up in a lawsuit as well, or a broker or anything else. So we go out and check the safer score, and we keep a tab on each one of our carriers to make sure that they are within the correct range as far as their score is concerned. If they've had too many accidents or too many delays or anything else, we really hesitate on signing up a carrier. So we do our good due diligence when it comes to signing them up. So as a shipper, we would sometimes fall in that trap of, oh, we know that carrier, we've done business with them forever, so there's no problem with that. And so sometimes you get into that trap, or you wouldn't be going back and looking at that score and didn't realize that they had several accidents, or maybe even a fatality, or whatever the case may be, or damaged freight or anything else along those lines. So sometimes you get into that comfort zone with a certain relationship. But again, as a broker, when we sign up, we go through and vet a carrier, make sure their scores are in the proper range, get them signed up, and then we constantly monitor their score and make sure that they stay within the acceptable limit. So,
Well, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out for a minute, because, right, the
sure.
question that we always get, well, where's the market going? Where's the market going? Is it up? Is it down? Is it flat? Is it left? Is it right? Is it upside down? And if the pandemic taught us anything, nobody really knows at the end of the day. But, let's talk through this year, or maybe even the next quarter. Because, I mean, even a year is tough anymore. It used to be kind of a more set, stable landscape, and we don't play in that world anymore. So where do you think it's going? Like, what are we telling people as we walk out there?
Well, if I had the exact answer, I wouldn't be working here. I'd probably give you my
That's
notice
fair.
tomorrow and retire. But no. After reading all the publications and talking to several different people, there's a lot of people that believe that the second half of this year we're going to see some improvement. There was thought that 2023 would see some improvement throughout the year. Never really showed up. I mean, it's still a tough market from a freight standpoint. I think there's been several companies that have exited the market. So I think capacity is going to start to tighten up. I think you're going to see the spot markets increase some more as we go through this year. So and companies have started chewing through their inventory. The previous company I came from, we, like everybody else during the pandemic, you had a hard time getting your product to your distribution centers or to the markets. So you ramped up production and got it through because there's transportation delays, whether it's ocean or whatever the case may be. And as you built up this amount, vast amount of inventory, it took a while to burn it off last year. So I do think that the second half of this year, I think you'll see an improvement as far as a carrier is concerned, improvement on their pricing, but an impact on capacity, and it'll be a cost to some customers and some of the businesses. So having that relationship, having your broker, having your carrier relationship, it will be very important, I think, in the second half of this year, just to make sure that you've got your capacity you need and that you have a good relationship with your broker and your carrier to have decent pricing. So
Well,
I think it will
I think you hit it too, because I mean, we all think about, even on the LTL front, you know, the Yellow bankruptcy, and everyone predicted LTL rates are going to go through the roof. There's all this volume in the marketplace that no one's going to be able to handle. And while there were blips and bumps, that's about as big as it got. And I don't think it impacted the market as a whole as much as people thought it would.
No, and I think that a lot of that was kind of built in. You hate to say that you knew it was coming, but you knew something was coming, right? So I think that a lot of people anticipated an impact and made some changes as before that announcement came out, as far before they filed for bankruptcy. So are we seeing some increases? I think sure you're going to see some general increases on some LTL, you know, because labor's still expensive, fuel still runs, you know, I mean, we're starting to hit peak season here before too long. You still have tires are expensive, so you're still going to see some general increases, but you're not going to see a big jump like people expected it to see. So, and same with truckloads. I mean, and I'd seen something, and I don't quote me, but I'd seen I think upwards of 35,000 trucks have been out of the market so far this last quarter and a half, just through bankruptcies or just closing down. So you start thinking about driver, you know, age of the drivers too. I mean, you start thinking your specialized equipment like flatbeds and steps. Your average age of the drivers getting up there, and you don't see a lot of new drivers coming into the market. And we haven't even started talking about autonomous vehicles or anything else along those lines, and if they're going to have any impact or what kind of cost or anything else that's going to come into play. So we're a long ways away, I think, from having a fleet of autonomous vehicles. So, but
I would agree, but I mean, as much as autonomous vehicles are still a little sci-fi, right? And we see it with the idea that, you know, Tesla, I think I just saw a commercial for GMC the other day that said that, you know, you can like tow a boat and you don't have to hold on to the wheel. Well, the idea is there, and I understand it. I think push, and I'm curious what you think and kind of what you're hearing in the market is the electrification of the market, because that is a very interesting puzzle to solve. Obviously, like we said, Scarborough owns its own trucks as well. And so I have been neck deep in some of this idea. Do we electrify part of our fleet? What does that do to fuel cost is the wrong way to say it, but the fuel cost savings. But then you look at, you know, additional costs of a vehicle, infrastructure. And so, and frankly, I don't think I have a truck driver that works for us right now that wants to drive an electric truck.
Yeah. I think the big problem that we have right now, obviously, is the infrastructure. So, I mean, you can go out and buy some of the equipment, whether it's most of it's mostly, like I said, the Hostler trucks, things like that you're going to find available now. But the challenge will be is the infrastructure. I mean, here in Kansas City specifically, we're not set up in certain areas to be able to handle that. And so I know California and other states, they're kind of leading the pack when it comes to infrastructure and getting set up for the change over to electrification as far as the vehicles are concerned. But then you have to start thinking about the weight, right? And the highways, and how much weight can you haul, and how long can you go? And I mean, there's a lot of factors that are involved. I know as I was at a EV seminar in New York City last year, as we talked about the industry and trucking and what's the future look like. And again, total cost of ownership came up quite a bit because they are a little more expensive. And do you offset enough from a savings on fuel, tax credits? Can you get any kind of incentives and stuff like that? But and how far can you go on a charge? Mm-hmm. And that's the other challenge. I mean, in the cities themselves, yeah, you might. I mean, from delivery trucks, you see a lot of Amazon and stuff with their smaller delivery vehicles that are out there that are EVs. But now you start putting a big rig out there and all the different weight and all the, it gets to be a challenge. I think it's going to happen someday, more than likely, but I think we're still quite a ways away.
And for me, kind of on the flip side of that, as I think through this, like, what does it look like for my hours of service for my drivers?
Yeah.
Right? Because if now we're stuck on the side of the road because we need to charge for X amount of time to finish the delivery, how does that get counted into hours of service if we're not, it's not just a fuel stop anymore. It's not it's not a 20-minute, I filled up my tank, I ran inside, I got a drink. Now it's no, I'm gonna sit here for a while. And so I would agree wholeheartedly that the infrastructure isn't there. It sounds fun. Believe me, I have looked at this more than my fair share of times. Just got off a phone call with a local company here in Kansas City yesterday about looking at some of our Hostler trucks, the trucks that move, containers and trailers around the yard. Do we go electric there and move away from diesel? And one of the first issues that we run into is the infrastructure isn't there to even support it. And then we have to go to Evergy or someone like that to try to get the infrastructure in. That's just here locally. And you expand that to the entire US, I think we have a long ways to go.
Yeah.
And so the idea is neat. I would love to drive a Tesla semi. They look really interesting, but at the end of the day, I'm not exactly sure if they're where we need to be quite yet.
Yeah, and as you talk about hours of service now, if you've got 100 drivers, now do you have to have 150 to do the same amount of freight? And if that's the case, where are you going to get the drivers? I mean, that's one of the biggest concerns right now too. There's just a lack of new entries into the driver market. So
and then you talk about if you have more expensive trucks, you've got that has to mean higher rates, right? And then you talk through, well, if they can't drive as much, that's higher rates. I need more drivers, that's higher rates. And so you start to think through this, and it could be really interesting over the next 5 or so years with kind of where this idea of electrification continues to go.
Yeah, believe me, I'd love to see it. I mean, as a kid, many years ago, I remember we're supposed to have flying cars by now, so we still don't have those. So I'm a little depressed about that. So
maybe one of these days.
That's right.
Well, we are just hitting on time. So Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All of you who joined, thank you as well. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to send them over and we'll be happy to get them answered. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. So thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Pat. Bye-bye.
You bet. Thanks.